Another draft physics presentation. Anyway, comments. Probably get on to galaxies a little bit. Some conversation will probably end up there because it's sort of related to dark matter, some of the comments, and blah 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 blah. So, just giving you the fair notice, subject matter, generally speaking. Anyway, off the day. I'd engage more if you wrote up what you currently stand behind. Well, obviously I have done that. You know, a lot of the arguments connecting this whatever theory of force being a real thing, actually made of stuff, and that the forces are all the same thing. Certainly, all of that's been written up, and in a general sense. And so, I mean, this accusation that somehow I haven't given you something explicit enough to argue with. I've made explicit statements about the weakness of evidence. Now, you could just make an argument that somehow, no, the evidence is so strong that it's going to be enduring forever and ever. It's infinitely strong. It can survive an infinite amount of time, being scrutinized by an infinite number of monkeys, and they're never going to find a flaw in your volume of evidence. You know, you can make some kind of counter argument defending how you think it's okay for physics to say things like, we know there are black holes, or we know that they send out waves because their matter is converted into bent space time. We know that time is a dimension that can be bent. You know, when they say things explicitly, that they have evidence to back up those we know statements. Now, those are simple things you could argue. You could show me how I'm being a fool for thinking there's anything weak in this structure of what I call bullshit that physics is based on. That their definition of causes is nonsensical, like many worlds and photon radar and photons can read our mind. Yeah, those contentions are in the open. So why don't you make your counter argument about how the evidence for that nonsense is so substantial that no reasonable person could sit there and say, oh, I think that whole edifice is bullshit. I think the equivalency principle is nonsense. Just made up because of our dim perception. You know, we can't see the difference between the abominable snowman and Sasquatch, and therefore we think they're equivalent. But no, they're different. You know, one's white and round, and one's tall and darker. Very different. Anyway, this ad-lib improv video, none of my videos are ad-lib improv. So that's just nonsense. They're clearly based on themes, and themes I have spent extensive time thinking about and arguing. So again, this is just cop-out rhetoric. Somehow you can't find my arguments in these arguments. You can't find me making explicit enough statements like Einstein was batshit out of his mind to sit there and think it's good enough evidence. I'll just turn gravity into some kind of bent, warped space, and I've done my job. No, that's not doing your job. You have a lot more of a job to do to prove it. And as I've pointed out, the Eddington experiment is absolute rubbish. Guess what? They found another plate. So there was 7 plates. I mean, as I think is in Eddington's own journal, which also is in Eddington's journal, is the fact that he said, I wouldn't stake my life on this. But anyway, you know, I think there was 7 plates, 7 photographs taken during the eclipse. 7. And all of a sudden they found one. You know, isn't that interesting that they were going to make a determination, all there is 7 little plates, that's all, just 7, and somehow they had to throw out a couple of them because that was including too much information somehow. Somehow you don't need that extra information. It shouldn't be part of the story somehow. Those photographs shouldn't be part of the story. Isn't that kind of evidence of something right there? Why wouldn't you include them, even if they were rubbish, even if they were blurry, which they weren't, but even if they were? Why wouldn't you include them just as a complete record? A little shit like that. So why don't you defend that crap? Because that's what I'm arguing. I'm arguing, as I've stated right from the very beginning, that the evidence upon which this whole edifice of quantum bullshit and time dimensions and all this other shit, the whole edifice that all this crap is built on, is a shitty edifice. It's a fucking crappy foundation. It's weak fucking evidence. So show how it's strong evidence. Anyway. Alright, improv video theorizing is all well and good for development purposes, but prohibits interaction. So somehow the statements I've made haven't been declarative enough, they haven't been explicit enough, they haven't been stated in some sort of precise enough language. I haven't said precisely enough. I think the evidence is insanely weak for the strength of the conclusions been drawn. You can't argue that? Explicit statement? Shit. With specific points. Well, I mean, the specific points are all kinds of other explanations are in the realm of possibility. And yes, they have all kinds of implications. There's all kinds of details. But the overall idea, okay, that all we really have in physics for, say, something like gravity is the inverse square law, and we don't have much else, and we're just trying to find causes for that relationship. And as I've pointed out, I can come up with lots of parallel things that have that relationship, and they all have it because rays of something are being emitted, things moving in straight lines, not waves. Anyway, the current problem I have with allocating more velocity, here we go, of direction in an object body, again, well, I'll read the whole thing, is the need to account for the average velocity that all must obey. Individuals don't have to obey any law of averages. You know, the plus one doesn't have to become a half because I have a minus one. The minus one can stay a minus one, and the plus one can stay a plus one, and the average doesn't get to change either one of those two inside the set. So this idea that everything in the set must obey the average, which is essentially what you're saying, is bullshit. The object body is needed to account for the average velocity of all must obey in order to give consistency to an object body. Again, the idea that you could have two runners in a little spherical ball, and one of the runners is running this way and one of the runners is running this way, and therefore the ball wouldn't roll, is not too hard to understand. So to say that I have to somehow account for how this runner isn't actually running this way and this runner isn't actually running this way because the ball isn't, because the average motion of the ball is nothing, that therefore the two runners aren't moving, I think is bullshit. But anyway, this whole argument that somehow you just can't possibly argue with the idea of the main points of what's being argued, which is that there are mechanical models that can explain the phenomenon we see, and they don't have any amount of error code any greater than the amount of error code in the current model, which relies on things like dark matter and dark energy, which says silly things like 80% of the universe is invisible. I mean, invisible in the sense that nothing even reflects off of it. I mean, it's not like they're saying it isn't lit up. They're saying it doesn't even reflect energy. Come on. The amount of error code in the current model is high, and the amount of error in the alternative model that I've presented certainly is no higher at its worst perception. At one of you malicious assholes paraphrasing it, you still can't make it look as bad as the current model, because there are no dark matters, there's no leprechauns, there's no poofter doofter magic forces that run it, that account for 80% of it. Alright, enough. Alright, so this is where some idiot, again, last name, first name, last name, sock account. But anyway, who cares? Whatever. You went to the trouble to type a whole bunch of crap, so we'll read it. So the paraplegic guy says, the story of the dark universe is as funny as it is sad. Astrophysicists invented dark matter to account for the stellar observations, suggesting that there is not enough mass to explain them. They then proceeded to invent dark matter to account for an entirely different gravitational anomaly. Before you know it, everyone is totally satisfied with the answer that 95% of the matter and the energy in the universe must be unobservable, and will stubbornly defend what are obviously circular arguments, because there is a consensus among scientists that the emperor's new clothes are invisible. But of course, the invisible and the non-existent look very much alike. To those defending dark matter, I ask, is it really scientific to assert the existence of something that is 5 times as plentiful as real matter, but conveniently undetectable, purely to salvage what is a commensurately failed theory? Alright, and so people will interpret that as somebody saying the whole theory of Newton's gravity or something has failed. It's really not a failed theory. It's a failed interpretation, or a failed understanding of 2 elements that we could have misunderstood. One of them is the redshift, the shifting of light, color, that we're associating with some sort of direct thing. Like if it's red shifted, it's moving away from us. If it's blue shifting, it's moving towards us. And yet we don't account for what moves perpendicular to us as having any shift at all, which doesn't seem to make much sense, because most of the matter, maybe all of it, is in some respect or another likely moving in some direction that isn't forward and back. It's also moving left and right. And if they're interpreting left and right movements as forward and back movements because they're red and blue shifted, that would be problematic to their mathematical equations working out. Now, the other problem, as I see it, with galaxies especially, is, yeah, this is sort of a new thing. I mean, we can't watch a galaxy over time, okay, because they move a little bit too slowly for human perception. So we can't just watch the bits inside the galaxy and say, what is the galaxy little bits doing? So the idea is, I would argue, okay, is that first it's a spinning thing, and that's sort of an obvious feature. And it has these swirly bits, okay, that let's say, how can I, they're proportional, they're symmetrical, they're balanced. There's as much swirly bit going one side as there is on the other side. You could draw a line through most of the galaxies, and you're going to get the same amount of mass on one side as the other side. And another feature that I sort of notice in a lot of these, so first off, and all the galaxies tend to do this. There isn't like there aren't galaxies that have the appearance of solar systems. So there aren't galaxies that are doing this thing, they're not doing like orbit things. We don't see any galaxies that look like this, where all the mass is spread out in a circle. Let's see, what other kind of galaxy could there be? Yeah, and we don't see what would be considered like just chaos galaxies, where there's just a bunch of chaos in a blob, a big giant non-distinct blob with absolutely no function or shape. So this seems to be the model, and that model has, and one of the other features that seems always to exist in these collections of stars is they seem to have this rotation feature, some function of turning is going on, for whatever reason. Now, they're also thinking of these things as objects that are collecting mass and pulling it towards a center. So they're sort of seeing galaxies as things that are, collecting mass. as something where the mass is moving into the galaxy, not that the stuff is moving out. So it's not in what would be considered orbits yet or something. Maybe it would be trying to form orbits. So this might be how they would think about how maybe the solar system was formed. They might think of it in terms of you're just a bunch of dust, and that the dust coalesces, and then finally you end up with planets that would be, in different locations as these arms broke off and became consolidated masses or something. But it all kind of depends on how you think about what the mechanics are. So, and so there's a ton of detail in all this. And so the other thing that's really important is when they're measuring gravity, the effects of little bits in these arms, and they're trying to figure out, speed and mass to figure out how much gravity you need to orbit, say here, compared to this center. And they're doing this mathematics based on the same mathematics you would use. Well, I should probably use a different color to make that a little more obvious. But I mean, for this distance, they're using essentially the same mathematics that you would use if you were measuring, Saturn versus the Sun or something. And there's there's lots of innate flaws in it, and it's really difficult to measure, but you can't use some standard, well, it's 1 over r squared times, 3 pi times blah blah. That stuff isn't really going to work, because the rules are sort of different, because you have such a consolidation of mass. So the problem becomes, as I've sort of pointed out, the inverse square law doesn't really function the same when you get close as it is when you're far away. So if you have a bunch of things, and especially a lot of them, so it gets very dense, these arms are full of mass. So in a way, these individual objects start to lose some of their individuality. In a sense, this object that has a gravitational relationship, its gravitational relationship is going to be with all of this mass. So you can't just say it's the inverse square law, because the fact is the gravity is hitting a whole bunch of objects. So it's not like it's the inverse square law is basically because these rays would spread out, and only, like, say if this was a body and then you were the other body being affected, obviously only one of the rays might hit you, so only one tiny percentage of the force hits you. But when you're affecting this whole arm, in a sense the inverse square law is not in effect anymore, and it's some other rule, because the mass is spread out over all of this area, and it's not an inverse square law kind of rule anymore. So in the dimension that the thickness, it says, the galaxy has a shape, on its edge, and all the mass is in that one plane. So clearly in this plane it's still the inverse square law, because you're missing with your gravity. None of the gravity going in these directions would be hitting any of the stars. But clearly in this plane you're hitting a lot of stars. So it's, I'm just saying the mathematics gets insanely complicated in terms of trying to describe how much of the gravitational force from one object is dissipated over a field of objects. It's not a relationship between M1 and M1. It's a relationship between M1 and a whole field of M1s spread over a whole area. So I'd say that there's potential that their mathematics is alone the problem, and that they haven't properly estimated these mass relationships in terms of the gravitational impact they're having on each other, not just their relationship to the center of the gravity, but their relationship to each other. Okay, is going to have a huge impact on where they're moving and how fast they're going to get there. Alright, so that's one point. Second point I'd make is I'm not even sure about how galaxies are formed, but it seems to me that the rotation thing sort of, and they do, some of them actually have what you can see in the center of the gravity. It looks very pointed. it almost looks like the arms are coming off of this thing rotating, and then the arms are just coming off of the same little bright spots. So it's like there's a binary system. You know, there's two heavy objects deteriorating, and that the galaxy is actually being spun off. It's stuff coming out of the center of the galaxy, and it's not stuff moving towards the center. It's stuff going out from the center. And that creates a different circumstance in the sense that when you're flinging stuff off because you're spinning, all the stuff you fling does move the same speed. So it does all have the same speed because it all got released at the same speed, and there's no friction in space and all that crap. And so the only thing slowing it down is how close it is to other objects. And obviously as it gets further away, so the traditional view of the galaxy, oh, that won't work. Let's just get a new piece of paper. That's what we'll do. We can afford it, I think. Just for you people. Just specially for you. I will, yes, I will use another piece of my 20-year-old surplus crap paper. You know, the traditional look of the galaxy is something like that. So the idea would be is in here they would compromise each other's speed some because there's going to be stronger interactions between each other because they're closer to each other. But the further out they get, the less they start interacting with each other, the less they're interacting with the center gravity, of course, also, the dual stars or whatever there are in the center, the dual black holes, whatever. And so it would get less drag as you go further out. So whatever speed they retain from going through this process, they would still have it out here. So that would explain why the curve for rotation speed, okay, if they try to measure these speeds, and I don't know exactly how they measure them. I don't know whether they're actually doing it by observation, like they actually saw the galaxy turn a little bit, or whether they're just using the redshift numbers. And obviously the redshift numbers could be flawed. But anyway, so let's just say that's true, though, that their observational data is correct. And so the observational data basically says, you know, it has a curve that basically says something like this. You know, it's like a straight line. Something like that. I mean, it goes like this or something. So it says some kind of line. But it's not doing what they would expect, which is this stuff should be going really, really slow. So instead of this stuff going really, this is what they predict. They predict this. And this is what they see. So this stuff out here is going much faster than they predict it should. And I think it can be explained by some other mechanism than creating a halo of dark matter. So that's the other subject to get to. Now, when they create this fake matter, the funny thing is they're not putting it in here. They're not saying there's a big pile of dark matter here, and therefore that's making the gravity stronger or something, because that wouldn't make this rotation speed faster. That would make this rotation speed slower. So they can't put the dark matter here in the center. Where they're putting it is out here in a halo. So they're saying that there's a halo out here, okay, and that this halo is spinning, and that this rotation of this dark matter halo is what's pulling this stuff faster. I guess I drew this the wrong way. It would be spinning this way, right? No, I had it right the first time. So the dark matter halo is spinning, and that's dragging this stuff faster. So it's making the arms move faster than they would because this halo out here is turning. That's getting a little bit complex now, isn't it? Come on, for the sake of argument, if you're going to make Invisible Man, this is like putting the Invisible Man in a tuxedo. I mean, it is, you know, it's one step above just Invisible Man. It's Invisible Man, white gloves, tuxedo, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's getting a little strangled that somehow now we have two effects. We not only have the existence of this invisible matter, but we have this new principle that somehow halos are created of this dense matter, and that the halo just happens to rotate at the same speed as the center of the galaxy. Now that all seems quite convenient, like it was just made up, but I don't know. I don't know what steps. Like there was a step 1 they went to, and then a step 2, and a step 3, and a step 4. We don't get to see the information, the raw data. We don't see how they went from some raw images, noticed something moving, did this, figured out that, and then got to step 2 and said, okay, we have this, we know these are going too fast, and then they went to step 3, which was invent the dark matter, and then make the dark matter move, and we didn't see how they came up with this whole theory of why this works, or why this makes sense, or how the dark matter got in the positions it is in, and why it would be stable in those positions, and why it wouldn't be attracting a bunch of the suns out of the galaxy, and why the suns wouldn't end up collecting next to the dark matter. Why does the dark matter not collect regular matter? If the dark matter has gravity, it should be in binary systems. We should have evidence of binary systems of rotation, where dark matter is rotating around regular matter. The two of them are spinning around each other. Do we have any evidence of that? I don't believe we do. So anyway, what I'm trying to say, the argument being made here isn't that I know for sure, I can prove that this is wrong, that this halo doesn't exist. The argument is that the procedure by which this conclusion became reasonable, okay, is based on just kind of imagination. They sort of just kind of made up a solution, and that the solution could be right, the solution could be wrong, but it's just a made up solution. And I could sort of argue that Einstein's math, in a sense, that's why it's so convoluted, is because it was a made up solution. Einstein knew how much Mercury was off, and so he had to create an equation that accounted for that much, and he did. But it doesn't mean the equation is right. It doesn't mean that it's right for the right reason. It's right for the wrong reason. It was contrived to be right for the circumstance. It rightly describes, it rightly accounts for it, but it might be accounting for it with completely wrong ideas, constants, and relationships that aren't real ones. Okay, something like that. Although I think most of Einstein's math is just doing Maxwell's math, which is induction math, which I find to be quite agreeable, because I think induction is a real principle. Alright, anyway. Yeah, that's probably enough of that. Yeah, I mean, this is real work. This isn't just like ad lib, blah blah blah. You have to think about this stuff, So again, these casual dismissals are just so irritating. And again, in an argument where all that's being requested from you people isn't like, oh yes, I get it, your evolution theory is the right theory. The concession is to recognize first that your own theory is weak, that your God theory is not immaculate, that it isn't some beautiful, perfect structure that is just so, it will withstand all challenges, when it's so obviously weak. Damn. Anyway, okay. So now we get to the snarky one. Alright, I don't know what your point is. Astrophysicists invented dark matter to account for stellar observations that suggest there is not enough mass to explain them. So again, the suggestion really isn't that there wasn't enough mass. The suggestion, the argument is that there's too much velocity. So first let's understand that. The argument wasn't that there wasn't enough mass. The argument kind of is that there's what they think of as too much mass in the center of the galaxy to account for the speed of the stuff on the outside, because it's going fast, which indicates there has to be more gravity in the center. That's what I meant to say. So because it's going fast, they're saying there must be more gravity in the system, and because it wouldn't be able to stay at the speed it's going unless there was more mass in the center of the graph, in the center of the galaxy. But then when they put the mass in the center, that didn't work either. So they had to put it on the outside. So let's understand there was two steps here. It wasn't just that they said the speed is too high. That is, they're observing Saturn and it's moving too fast around the sun. If you saw Saturn, it was moving twice as fast as it should be. You'd have to conclude the sun was twice as big as it should be, because that's the only way Saturn would stay in that orbit. So again, it's these conclusions that first these are even orbits in the first place, when the galaxy is obviously looks like something in transition. It's either pulling stuff in or it's flinging stuff out, but it's not doing orbits. So I could argue that the first mistake is to use orbital math and say these are orbital rings, because they're not orbital rings. They don't have to obey the same physics. When you're being flung out, you're not obeying the same physics as the Earth in its constant orbit. There's different rules when things are moving out of the solar system. Anyway, I suggest there's not enough mass to explain them. That's right. Whatever. Now, what's your... So again, he's certain first that he has all these velocities correct, when I would argue that I'm not sure it's observational data. I'm not sure they actually counted how far the sun's moved. I think it's, again, is a thing where they're just going based on redshift, which could be deceptive. Alright. Now, what you're conveniently left out of your snippy comment was the fact that multiple independent lines of evidence pointed to there being the exact same amount of mass where we couldn't see it. And again, the idea of you solve your problem by creating a balancing system of some kind, where you put not only mass in the center of the solar system, but you put a big ring, a halo of mass on the outside of the solar system to control everything in the game. You're saying that confirms your theory, when I would argue that that's more obvious of how it's contrived. So that, again, is subject to interpretation. That looks to me like a desperate move, rather than one, oh, here's a second feature of this, that if we put it on the outside, it works even better. You know, that doesn't demonstrate that it works at all. All right. We couldn't see it. Okay, it's not just light bending. Well, again, so the light bending, see, this halo thing is really convenient for the light bending purpose, because once they have this idea that they can create halos of dark matter, right? Well, yeah, that's, you know, that's basically a lens, right? Now you've created your opportunity to create gravitational lenses that only create lensing effects in bands, little thin bands, because now we have this principle that we can create different size rings of dark matter anywhere we want to. So even though the system has no obvious, you know, there's no asteroid belt of dark matter, there's no idea of that thing really existing, because you have a toy, you know, that, oh, it works both for galaxies and for lensing. You know, now you've said that that's your proof, when again, that seems very circular. Like you're saying that I can't come up with some made up thing that creates spheres in the locations you want them to be in, when we know that all explosions are going to be spherical, generally speaking, in the universe. When anything explodes, it's going to tend to go spherical. That all gravity always pushes things, generally speaking, into spheres. And so you're going to use the existence of a spherical object as there. Doesn't that prove it, because spherical is part of the fundamental nature of the universe? So because you've now conveniently made your dark matter spherical in a manifestation we don't see in the real world, except for maybe around Saturn, you know, Saturn's rings, you know, but that's sort of what they're saying. They're saying the dark matter forms in patterns like Saturn's rings. All right, anyway. Couldn't see it. It's not just light bending, it's the speed of galaxies. It's many things that are not bending light. I know, like we already know that. So again, he's making such a straw man argument because paraplegic guy wasn't saying they only use dark matter to fudge their bent light crap. They use it to fudge their speed problems. He was already aware of that. I know this has been mentioned before. So again, who was making an argument about that? The argument was that, well, first it was Holiday who said they're not using dark matter to fix lensing images, when of course they are. Now maybe you're an, I don't know what that is, and can't remember, amnesiac, okay, can't remember, but more likely you're just willingly ignoring evidence. So again, this is just a straw man argument. There's no evidence that paraplegic wasn't quite aware of the fact that they use dark matter to fix both broken math to run galaxies and broken math to do lensing images. He's probably quite aware of that. Again, there is evidence that these lying scientists aren't just making stuff up to account for errors in their system. There is no evidence. The only evidence of dark matter is in places where their mathematics has a problem. Then the dark matter comes to the rescue. If this was the case, then we would expect different lines of evidence to not agree with one another. Frankly, I don't even think that's been tested. To tell you the truth, I think all of the lensing images where they claim it's dark matter, I bet no one has done the math to figure out how it fucks up the motion of all the other planets around that lens. So I would bet you that no one has even bothered to calculate the gravitational impact on the objects actually moving in the system. So I bet you they haven't even tested the consequences of their fix. Their fix probably does break things, but they're not going to look for it. That would be the argument, that they haven't looked for it. They haven't looked for the errors their fix is going to create. And I bet you they're there. If this was the case, then we would expect different lines of evidence not to agree with one another. This is a simple point. No, the simple point is you're claiming these guys have done all of this careful study and that they haven't just said, oh, that works, let's use it. That they somehow well tested other mechanisms, that they were damn sure about what they were, their conclusions, that they have really, really good, precise images of stuff. And you're just making the accusation that you're quite confident that they've figured all that out and that LIGO just didn't make up a story to go with a chirp. That kind of thing. When clearly they could have, because there's no way any of us are going to have access to the process that it went through to figure out what this chirp meant. This is a simple point, but despite how simple it is, you have chosen to completely ignore it, even though it was just brought up in comments in the previous video. So again, nothing's been ignored here. What you don't have is this thing called evidence. You just have the authorities say so. And again, you're not even accurately describing exactly where they're placing the dark matter and how you know that their placement of the dark matter doesn't break something else. You don't have any way of knowing any of that. Now, I think it is a choice that you have chosen to make. Again, what's the crime in saying there's no direct evidence of the existence of this dark matter? That all you have is these indirect circumstantial evidence, and I would argue that you have no mechanism for its placement, no mechanism that puts it where it is, nothing to explain how it does any of this selective placement, and yet you're just going to claim that we know that's how it works. And nobody can say, I'll tell you, give me more evidence. I don't think so. I keep pointing out the reason why your logic sucks. So again, you're illogical if you say something like, well, maybe galaxies are pushing matter out, not collecting matter in. And you people just keep saying the same stupid bullshit. So again, whatever. What you don't do is concede the evidence is far beneath the standard that should be required for people to say, we know this is what the universe is made out of. we know that 70% of the universe is dark matter. The evidence is way too thin for those statements. We know that light is bent by gravity because we know that dark matter is doing it. 70% of the bending is being created by dark matter. Because yes, if you relied on the regular matter, no chance. By the way, what is your point? That light actually bends more than what's predicted by Einstein? So that's an amazing statement. I don't even know how you even come up with that. How could the argument be that light bends more? There's no evidence of it bending more. There's evidence that it's bending in places where there's no gravity, not that it's bending too much in places where there's too much gravity. I don't even know what you're saying, because that's exactly what one line of evidence for dark matter would suggest. What line of evidence for dark matter suggests that light should be bending even more? There's not a single place where there's well, you could argue that yes, there's lots of places where we know there's lots of gravity and the light isn't bending at all. Yeah, exactly. So he's using that as evidence of how this theory must be right, because there's no dark matter there, so therefore the regular gravity isn't nearly strong enough to bend the light, even though there's what should be enough gravity by the old standard, whatever the old standard was. Oh, that's right, the time-dilated standard. That is where you do the mathematics and you cut the probability, the improbability of bending in half by merely saying something silly like, well, the photon's moving the speed of light, therefore it must be time-dilated, therefore it spends twice as long in the gravity, because it thinks it's in the gravity twice as long. And so therefore we can cut the weakness of the gravity, we can make the gravity twice as strong, because we can pretend the photon was in it twice as long. You mean that mathematics? God, you're so fucking retarded. God, you're so fucking dishonest to sit there and describe these critiques of your weak evidence as anything else but, yes, honest statements saying, whoa, horsey, okay? Because the carts are gone. I mean, your cart is so far ahead of your horses. So if you wanted light not to bend, would you deny the evidence? Here we go again. Deny what evidence? Where's this evidence? But then if it suggests Einstein theory is incorrect, then and only then do you accept it? So again, I guess he's saying that dark matter suggests that regular matter doesn't create the kind of gravity that bends light, but dark matter gravity does bend light. What is your, I don't even understand your argument. What are you saying? Where is there any evidence? First off, there's no rational mathematical evidence for all of the stellar lensing. There's not one circumstance where you see lensing in the galaxy and it has anything to do with rational mathematics, because there isn't enough mass. The lens is way too big and the mass is way too small. So how is that incorrect as an observation? Einstein theory is incorrect, and only then can you accept it? I still don't understand. Either way, it seems like you haven't even recognized this inconsistency. I think the idea that you're not recognizing is that it sounds incredibly convenient to create a form of matter that just creates gravity and has no other consequence. Despite it being brought up before. How? Brought up where? Where was this evidence brought up? Where was any evidence of lensing brought up anywhere, okay, that was anything like good evidence? You're literally too fucking dumb to be compost. Well, whatever. You're just making ad hominem insults and not providing any evidence for your accusations, and your accusation is clearly, in my opinion, completely incoherent. Where would the evidence of dark matter suggest that Einstein was wrong? Where have they placed it in the universe that makes Einstein look stupid? Explain that part to me, because I can't see it. I can't see how dark matter fixes Einstein in the first place, because it doesn't, because it hasn't even been tested. Again, you're just using it to glue what you want to fix together, and you don't have to account for consequences because you place it anywhere you want. Anyway, and make it go as fast as you want. Make it rotate any speed you want. As I said, you're retarded. I'm done talking with retards here. Well, again, you've just demonstrated who you are in terms of having no integrity, and that you talk, you have all this evidence of something when you didn't present a single link to any kind of evidence. You just sit there and declare to us that we have to believe you. Well, I don't have to do that. Alright, so then Hothele chimed in. Dark matter principle justification is to do with velocity graphs, rotation curves of galaxies. Nothing to do with lensing and its need to fit with general relativity. So again, it's just they all have jumped on, once it became acceptable to talk about dark matter, all the cosmologists who understood anything about lensing knew, oh, thank God, this saved us. Because they knew if they were challenged on the mathematics, they couldn't make any of the lenses make sense. They never talked about it, but they knew that the math didn't work. That the lensing was happening way too far away from all the gravity, and therefore it couldn't be being caused by the galactic cluster or whatever the fuck it was, because it definitely wasn't enough mass and enough density to bend the light as far away from the cluster as the light was being bent. So they knew they were in big trouble, and so as soon as dark matter became acceptable answers to questions, they loved it, because now they didn't have to sit there and say, yes, our math doesn't work, because now they could put the dark matter halo in the galaxy, in the cluster, and they could just fix it all. Just you need some lensing excuses. You need just make a halo of dark matter. Problem solved. You can put your lens anywhere you want to in the universe, because you can just make a halo out of dark matter. Problem solved. All right. So I said, well, let me finish it. Fit general relativity. These velocity curves disobey the inverse square law. So again, this is just an assumption. They only disobey the inverse square law if you're correct that these are supposed to be orbits. But they don't disobey the inverse square law if you understand that the arms of the galaxy are not orbitals. They're not in an orbit. They're actually leaving orbit, or they're going out, or they're going in, but they're not in orbit. So I could make lots of arguments about how this has nothing to do with the inverse square law. It has to do with their understanding of which way this crap is moving. Alright. These velocity curves disobey the inverse square law. Liar. I mean, that's just that's a prejudgment prejudice of yours as a conclusion. But there's no reason to believe the inverse square law was violated anywhere in here. What is at risk is your theory of function. You haven't got the interpretation of the function of a galaxy correct. Evidence occurred by Fritz Zaki and Wilde Ribben, whatever. This is a piece of shit, so it's Wikipedia crap. And it basically points out this halo nonsense. So the fact is, they're not placing dark matter in the center of the galaxy, they're placing it in a halo around the galaxy. Okay, I'm quite certain that if you do a YouTube or Google search on dark matter and lensing, you'll get a Google of results. That means like a billion, million, trillion. Yeah, you'll get plenty of results. Then Parallel Logic says, the science journal dedicated to the study of gravitational lensing disagrees with you. Well, that would make sense too. Dark matter is found whenever normal matter, such as stuff, so he's quoting from that journal, makes up galaxies is found. For example, large galaxy clusters will contain a very great amount of dark matter which exists within the and around the galaxies that make up the cluster. Light coming from more distant galaxies then passes close to the cluster may be distorted. So in some cases they put the dark matter in the cluster itself, probably in halos, but still in the cluster. But regardless, it's just gravity fudge. It's just made up You don't have enough to make your math correct, so you just make up new gravity anywhere you want. It's just the invisible man. It's just a wild card, and there's no reason to really believe it exists except to fix your wrong assumptions, to make your wrong assumptions right assumptions. That's it. It doesn't serve any other purpose, this dark matter, but to fix wrong assumptions. All right. So here we go. Metapelagic, he calls them, or whatever. Mentapelagic. Anyway, just more ad hominem bullshit. In what way, shape, or form does anything you posted address the point being made that the observed speed of galaxy rotation directly violates Newton's inverse square law? So again, it doesn't. So this idea that you know which way those arms are going, that you know that they're in orbits, that you know that the inverse square law, especially in the mathematics of calculating the effects of the stars affecting each other, that you can't do the equation, you can't do Newton's singular equation between a star out here that's all by itself and a star in a cluster of stars. The inverse square, Newton's math doesn't even work in that circumstance. You can't go, this star is here, this star is here, I'm going to do the math now to figure out the effects between these two stars. Because this star's gravity is going to affect every single one of these other stars. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. It's not going to be the inverse square law anymore, is the point. The r squared in the bottom of the equation is going to be something less than r squared, because it's going to affect all the stars. Okay, more of the gravity is going to be captured than the r square rule would indicate. So the r squared is going to be wrong because there's going to be more gravity captured in one of these planes, and that's important. All right, in what way, shape, okay, there's Newton's inverse square law. First of all, I think you're a poor reader. Well, I think you're just a bigot. And you don't realize that nothing in the article, which is not a science journal in the sense of being peer-reviewed, by the way, but your inability to comprehend the difference between science journals and websites which report findings of such is beside the point. No, the point is how do they link to a Wikipedia article that actually has all that text on it saying this article needs help, this is all bullshit, we haven't figured out any of this crap, blah 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 blah. His link sucked. So your critique of this other guy's link is just bullshit. I mean, they're all just bad articles. You link to has anything to say about why scientists adopt the model of dark matter in the first place. Well, even Hosliday's article pointed out how there's a bunch of counter theories that don't need dark matter to explain, modified Newton mechanics. And again, if the modification is just recognizing that the inverse square law breaks down when you're making comparisons between a sun over here and a cluster of suns over here. It simply addresses the fact that one line of evidence, light bending, happens to support the dark matter hypothesis. Again, and support it in what way beyond it just being, yes, of course, wild cards work. I know I shouldn't even bother responding because you're too inept mentally to get what I'm saying. But in no way, shape, or form did your non-argument address the fact that all lines of evidence, including the speed and rotation of galaxies, all support the existence of dark matter. So all lines of evidence. Again, and support it in which way, and how much detailed analysis of the consequences of their own addition. They never even were honest, okay? They were showing lensing images from the galaxy since, like, I don't know, Carl Sagan's day. And they were never even honest about the fact that, yes, our mathematics currently doesn't make this make any sense. Einstein must be wrong if this is actually happening because, frankly, it doesn't add up mathematically. So they didn't even admit the fact when their evidence wasn't strong at all, because they didn't have the dark matter to save it. They didn't even admit that, yes, we really needed dark matter. So it's good it showed up because we really needed it to fix all these broken lensing images. So the fact that they were lying for decades about the fact that their math doesn't work, and they didn't even say so, and then when dark matter shows up, they just go, oh, see, our math was right after all because the dark matter came to the rescue. You see? You're the ones that were caught lying for decades about the fact that your math didn't even work. Alright. You just kept saying Einstein's right, Einstein's right. Even though you had evidence that he was wrong. Fuckers. I mean, and certainly it was stupid evidence of his wrong in the fact that, yes, it was way too much lensing for way too little mass. So it was even evidence that, no, both notions are probably wrong. And the fact that your stupid lensing images are blue shifted should be a giveaway anyway. Somebody shouldn't even have to point out how this all doesn't make much sense, because why are your lensing bits blue shifted? Alright, all lines of evidence, including the speed and rotation of galaxies, support the evidence of dark matter. And that all lines of evidence independently confirm that there is the same amount of dark matter. So, amazing. I've heard estimates that go from 60% to 95%, and yet he'll say that all lines of evidence point somewhere. What a crock of crap that is. When there are multiple independent lines of evidence pointing to the exact same conclusion, oh, you can't use that argument, because frankly I have that one sewn up, in the sense that my unification theory actually unifies, and that the particle model works for every single bit of force, but that doesn't mean anything to you idiots, okay, as an argument. The fact that, you know, it proves magnetism, and the fact that it proves the nuclear force, and the fact that it proves gravity, and it does all these things, somehow doesn't mean anything to you, so why should this argument mean anything to me? But the fact is, we know that there's only two lines of evidence. It fixes your broken galaxy math, your wrong assumptions about how galaxies function, and then it obviously creates a hugely convenient, I can make a lens anywhere now in space. Then what good? Then that's a good reason to adopt conclusion. So again, you say so. So you have incredibly weak circumstantial evidence, which is basically saying a blind witness told you what he saw, and then a deaf witness told you what he heard, and you're saying they corroborate each other. Oh, okay, yeah, that's really good evidence. That's only the bare minimum requirement for being considered a rational person. Yeah, fuck you. Period. Yeah, no, it's not rational to sit there and sit on top of a pile of very weak evidence and then declare how your God is God. That's not being reasonable or fair. End of story. You are too stupid to have this much arrogance. Exactly the words I would... Fuck, that's a mirror that you should look in, fucker. It's disgusting to me. Yes, likewise, that this education system in whatever country you had the misfortune of being born in, likewise, I would just wonder what kind of fucking disgusting upbringing you've had. What kind of creatures raised a fucking arrogant, obnoxious, dogmatic piece of shit like you? Okay, failed so catastrophically. Your mother must have been one hell of an ignorant cunt. You know, to leave you abandoned in your little playpen to make up your fantasy stories and declare yourself King Jedi, or whatever the fuck you're doing, you fucking useless piece of shit. You're too stupid to provide something called evidence. You know, all you can do is type all this fucking snarky rhetoric. I declare myself, protector of the truth. Well, protector of the weekly evidence theories of fun I believe in, because I need fun in the universe. Dark matter fun to play in. It's like fucking invisible poo for you to eat. Allowing you to graduate when you can't even think critically about anything. He's talking about critically thinking when he's propagandizing in defense of phantasmagorical, mushy bullshit theories of magical invisible matter and invisible this and invisible that. Leprechauns and pixies for everyone. And he's fucking insulting other people? Jeez, what a piece of crap. Fuck you. Alright. I'm getting tired. Anyway, alright, you have some cool and interesting ideas. Well, I'm not doing the cool thing. I actually wish the videos were 15 to 20 minutes hyper-focused on... Look, you know, physics is... There's tons of detail in this shit. It's really tiny stuff. really weak evidence. You know, it's really delicate evidence, really delicate. You got to hold it just right to be able to tell what the hell shape the puzzle pieces are. Everything's in a fog, and everything's kind of, you got to be careful, really terribly careful. So yeah, maybe it's just not the subject for you, shithead. On a single-ish idea, since I don't have time to watch 46-minute videos. Well, you just don't have time for physics then, okay? Because physics is going to take this kind of conversation. It takes a lot of conversation to explain why assumptions might be wrong. It's hard to explain. Okay, they're making halos out of dark matter. Okay, I mean, it's going to take me a while to explain why halos really isn't physics. All right, but they are nice when you do have time. I have been indoctrinated by Ken. Well, you know, I don't understand how you watch his videos. He says the same shit over and over and over and over again, and for 15 minutes or 20 minutes at a time, and that's okay with you? I mean, he says absolutely the same fucking things. He doesn't say something new. He just keeps saying the same fucking shit over and over and over, like 5 words. Hyperboreal perturbation, coaxial linear blah blah blah. Anyway, for the last year or so now, I'm going to check out what you have to say. As humans, 90% of anything we know at a given point in history has been wrong. Well, I mean, this idea that humans are always wrong is idiotic. We have nailed a lot of facts since, 10,000 years ago. In many sciences, they are pretty good. Like biological science hasn't made up too many fantasy stories. I mean, they sort of seem to have been able to do their science with some sort of integrity. But yes, physics hasn't. It's the same today. Well, it's not the same today. I mean, our knowledge base is goddamn huge. The pile of evidence is goddamn huge. But yes, the part being argued about is still the tiniest little bits in the universe. So yes, that evidence isn't so good. So I love hearing all the different views on the topics. Well, you're doing it for the wrong reason, because most of the science isn't going to change. Most of the facts we have in the fucking drawers are going to stay exactly the same. I sometimes think you and Ken are actually on the same team with similar ideas. Well, you're crazy then. But with completely different descriptions and vocab. Well, again, it's just idiotic. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that Ken doesn't want to make anything material or anything deterministic. So I guess that's the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. You'll say particle, Ken's now calling particles hard light. Well, this whole bullshit of Ken's where he's the idea that the idea that matter is made out of energy is already something that's really a 100-year-old idea. That's a 500-year-old idea. All right, but how it manifests that relationship that's really the whole conversation. And yes, it wouldn't matter if it's a semantics problem in terms of as long as we identify what's the entity that has the superpowers. But clearly, people think photons have the power when no, they're the ones not doing the wavy thing. They're not the ones deciding to turn. They're being oppressed by the material environment. So there's clear distinctions. Scientists are getting a little too hung up on vocabulary, and what I do know for sure is that the mainstream model is just completely and pathetically wrong. I don't know how you know that. It's not completely wrong. So again, that's so stupid a thing to say. You can't know it's completely wrong because it's not completely wrong. And you and Ken are slowly uncovering new ideas that seem to work better. Well, I don't know how any of Ken's ideas work at all. How can you even make a comparison? I can't. There's no explanation for why things are attracted or why things repel. There's no mechanism. There's no drawing, there's no explanation where the energy comes from, nothing. He doesn't account for a fucking thing. So please don't put me in the category next to him, because that's just saying, I can smell your poo and it smells shitty. You're just insulting me, fucker. And then mainstream quantum physics. So good job, and this stuff is cool. Well, whatever. This whole fucking being called cool is again just like drooling on me. What do you think? I'm going to be impressed by that crap? It's cool, dude! No, I'm not! Retard. Okay, Lisa Engineer. Lena. In the abstraction, it go longer in one direction and become like elliptical. Yes, that was the word I was looking for when I said paraplegic or something. I was trying to say elliptical. I understand not having motion. The nuclear force parts are equally pressured. Is this the meaning and additional velocity working for processional force converter? Processional force converter. The point is that it's a mechanism that in the regular universe wouldn't have any friction working against motion. That's all. That's all it exists for, is to illustrate the possibility of motion converting linear motion, straight line motion, into orbital motion that creates some new motion that's a combination of the two other motions. Okay. Alright, spare mind. I've actually seen a career physicist arguing about the equivalence principle applied to light and thus other forces. Even sometimes this basic is not agreed upon, which is a bit interesting. Yeah, well, the equivalency principle isn't based on any, like, again, it's not based on hard evidence. It's just based on the thing that he says, well, yeah, this one looks black and that looks black and they look the same, so okay, they're the same. But the idea that all forces act the same or are the same just doesn't make much sense. But obviously all acceleration is going to be all the same, in the sense that you're going to be hit by something, a force, whether it's bent space or not, who cares. The idea of things that move things are going to have to accelerate them. Nothing just transports to another location. Nothing just, instantly goes somewhere. The bits all have to be moved somewhere. So that process of being moved is always going to be equivalent, in the sense that the same process has to take place, which is everything here has to be forced to go somewhere else. The bit's going this way, the bit's going that way, the bit's going this way, the bit's going... Any bit going any which way, or any bit doing any such thing, just standing still, whatever, however you want to think about it, the little atoms that are just staying in their position over here have to somehow be forced to go over here. And that process of being forced is always going to be the same. But the forces are not equivalent. Okay. Even something this basic is not agreed upon, and thus certainly no surprises about their disagreement about dark matter. Considering path length changes in directions, interesting. Another thought, even if it is only considered as a single group of arrows, say 3 moving in the same direction, 50% of the time the arrows which are not part of the cluster will point in the same direction. So for frame 1, 3 might be, well, I don't know. That's going to get too complicated. Alright. Never mind that part. I'll study it later. See. But anyway, okay, enough. And so, till the next time, and such. Yeah, that felt like work. Alright, anyway. Yeah. See ya.